Across the Fence, we'll discuss money, health, and retirement. Those are just some of the topics in a new book by a Vermont author, Getting Older Better. Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. Our guest this afternoon is a therapist, life coach, and author from Shelburne who has just written her third book, Getting Older Better. The book includes more than 100 brief essays which focus on everything baby boomers need to know about aging. I want to welcome Pam Blair. Thanks so much for being here.
Nice to be here, Judy.
Now, the cover of the book describes as being for women in their third act. Mm-hmm. Why women and why the third act?
Okay, the third act is probably the most exciting act for women, because I'm a woman, I wrote for women. That's number one. Number two, I did this because I was on a journey of my own. I started doing the research for this 5 or 6 years ago when I began to wonder, what are other women experiencing as they age? And what kind of wisdom can I take from the literature and from the research? And so I had a really good time writing this, really.
Mm-hmm. And so you've written in a format that's sort of short essays, and you ask mm-hmm. questions for the readers to answer themselves and actually journal. Why did you decide to do that? Because
I don't hold all the wisdom of the world. Wish I did. And so the reader, I'm trying to help them access their own wisdom and respond to my questions about the various topics, and then journal about them. Okay.
And so you had, actually, we were talking earlier, and you had a unique experience that sort of, I think, left a really big impression on you as mm-hmm. far as what it's like to be older.
Yes, indeed. In, let's see, I was in about 52, I'm 65 now. I was hit by a car sitting at a stoplight. I just signed a contract for one of my books. I don't remember which. Oh, this one, yeah, mm-hmm. the one on death. And I had death books in my back seat, and the car came out of nowhere. The death books were from the library, and I sustained a closed head traumatic brain injury, sort of like shaken baby, you know, mm-hmm. where your head goes back and forth. And I got with a neuropsychologist to help me through cognitive rehabilitation. It took about 2 years to get back to quote unquote normal. But in the meantime, she said, I was living the life of about an 80 or 90-year-old woman who wasn't aging extremely well because I was walking with a cane, I had convergence issues in my mm-hmm. eyes, I was aphasic, I had word-finding difficulties, I had trouble hearing, all kinds of things, and I had to walk with a cane. And then I realized, after I got over the anger at the accident, that being 80 or 90 wasn't so bad. Albeit it was temporary. Mm-hmm. I knew that I was eventually right. going to recover most of my abilities. But it wasn't so bad. My world got smaller, but it got even more special.
What are we afraid of when it comes to aging?
I think we're afraid of the myths that we've taken forward from past generations, okay? And for instance, we have the possibility of living these days, 50 years past our menopausal years, 50 more years of all kinds of adventures. We baby boomers are the pioneers again of a new age. And we were pioneers in the 60s, and we're pioneers again. What are we afraid of? I think we're afraid of the unknown. And that's why I wrote the book and talked to women of all kinds of ages, and then went in and looked in all of the research to find out what other people were saying about it.
Mm-hmm. Money and health are often major issues that we face. What advice in the book do you give about that?
Money and health. Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, you need to not be afraid around your money. Just find somebody to talk to. Get a plan in place. It may or may not last you forever, the money you have set aside. But understand this, Judy, at a certain point, we don't need any more things. All right? I have a couch. How many more couches am I going to need in the next, before I die? I have plenty of sweaters. I've got, socks falling out of the drawers. So I don't really need to spend more money, except perhaps on health care. Now that's a big one for most people.
Right.
But I've got enough things. So the actuarial tables that say, oh, well, you better, you're not going to have enough money to live into your later years, they don't take into account that we're spending less. We may want to spend more, if we have it, on travel and things like that. But mm-hmm. we don't need anything else, do we?
And that's actually can be quite liberating, and you talk about that in the book, is to let go of those things.
Yes.
Focus more on yourself as opposed to stuff.
Yes, and on the relationships around you. So many women, for instance, are so worried about aging and their wrinkles and everything else that they have very little time for their grandchildren. Because they're off at the parlor or they're getting their Botox, or calm down, hold your grandchildren, read them a story, or visit your children and annoy them, your grown children.
It's worth it. Now, you have an earlier book that's called The Next 50 Years. How is this new book different?
Well, The Next 50 Years was an expanded version of this, just to put it very succinctly, but it had space for journaling. Okay, so there were lines in there which invited the reader, and it's still available for sale, to write their stuff in the book, and then hand it off to a younger woman or their daughter or someone like that. So the book became co-written by the reader. This is a different format. This is telling you to get your own journal, number one, and number two, there's a lot of updated stuff in this one. And I love the cover.
It's great. So what would you say to someone a woman in her 40s maybe, who looks in the mirror and says, wow, when did that happen? And realize that, your body is changing,
yes,
even though you think you're still in your 20s or 30s.
I would say grieve. Allow yourself to be sad. Allow yourself to look back at some of the pictures of you when you were young, when you were 19 and 20 and nothing was happening, at least physically. And grieve a little bit. Allow yourself to be sad. And then get on with your life. I mean, come on, let's live.
And that's part two of the book, as you say, to appreciate the little things, the small things.
Oh
Take
my
10
gosh.
minutes in your day just to stop and reflect on all the good things.
Reflection is a very important part of the developmental journey of the older person. So looking back on your life is fine. In fact, over the weekend, because it was Mother's Day, I went through old albums, and I was looking at pictures of my mother at my age and saying, I'm doing much better, because she really didn't have the information I have. She smoked like crazy and she sat in the sun all the time. And then I watched a video that my young son took of my grandmother's 100th birthday party. Okay, and I watched her interacting with people. She was blind and somewhat deaf at that age, but she was having a party and she was happy. And so you know what? I'm having such fun talking to you, I forgot your question.
Well, I mean, that's all part of it. It's all about your attitude. I mean, your body is going to change. There's really nothing you can do. You can, maybe if you have the resources and the wherewithal to do the plastic surgery thing,
Sure, why not,
fine.
if you want to.
But at some point, you really do have to sort of get over that and just still be yourself, even if the shell looks a little different.
Oh yeah, because you know what? The internal development continues, all right? The outward development continues in its own way, and it's nothing much you can do to stop that. But your internal development is really the most important part of this journey, isn't it, Judy? Yeah.
And so, you encourage people, too, to keep active and keep doing things and keep learning.
Yes, indeed. In terms of exercise, all right, I don't get into a whole lot of that kind of stuff, or eating right or anything. I touch on those topics. But I think it's important to find something fun you like to do. I love aquasize. In a heated pool, of course. But I've tried all kinds of other things earlier on, jumping around, and I kept hurting myself.
Yeah.
So you've got to be careful and do what you love and, do it the correct way.
I'm just happy that I can still shovel manure. That makes me happy. Now, you're a psychotherapist and a life coach. What does a life coach do?
A life coach spends less time going back into the past, the deep, dark past of your childhood and all of that. A life coach will take you from today going forward. Now, where it helps that I'm also a psychotherapist is if the client and I run into a block that's keeping them from their success, sometimes it exists back there, and we have to go back there and take a peek. All right. But for the most part, life coaching is about getting on with your life and removing the blocks that keep you from success.
Do you think that older people have more blocks than younger people, or does it matter?
Gee, I've never looked at that question, but I think to answer right off the cuff, I think they have less blocks. I think it's more about, okay, I've got X number of years left perhaps, what am I going to do with my life? And I think that's where the fear comes in. Oh my gosh, maybe I didn't get to what I was going to do, and I'm all so fearful. Well, fearful is draining. We need to let go of those fears.
It's a kind of a waste of time.
It really is.
And also, too, don't succumb to pressures, external pressures you talk about, where people say, okay, well, at this point in your life, the children are out of the house, or maybe your spouse is out of the picture for whatever reason, so now you should be downsizing, or you should, move, or you should do whatever.
Simplify your life. And that's how you can be most successful going forward. As a life coach, this is what I tell women in my practice. Simplify things. If you're living in a 4,000 square foot house, get a smaller one that you don't have to worry so much about. Things like that. Get rid of your stuff that you have to dust every 5 minutes, and concentrate on other things in your life that are most important. Your family, your friends, your activities.
And being out there.
Yes.
Active.
Yes.
What are some of the things that you suggest people do other than simplify? What are some of the other ways to simplify rather than just sort of going through your stuff?
Simplifying, it really has a lot to do with stuff, because stuff does have energy, Judy. Every time I walk by a certain item in my house, I feel it talking to me. But simplifying in terms of learning to say no to all the demands that women are very often expected to fulfill. All right, the church, the this, the that, and say yes to those things that are most important. In other words, cull out the things that, I'm not saying throw out the church activities, but
well, if it seems like an obligation to you, maybe reassess it.
Reassessment, very good word. Great.
And you also talk about gardening, which is something I love to do. But why is gardening good?
Well, because it gets you back in touch with things that grow, all right? And if we're growing internally, that's a really wonderful place to be. It's also a great exercise, but you've got to pace yourself. In the old days, when I was 40 and beyond, I would pick up rocks, big rocks, and move them around my garden. And no more. I've hired somebody to come and do that. But you've got to know your limits.
Right.
But do get outside and play in the dirt. And we got plenty of mud here.
Absolutely. What is I know one thing my mother, who's in her 80s, has said is that, well, society, is anti-aging and doesn't appreciate old people. I don't think that's true. But how do you sort of get over that, to think that you might be, as an older person, sort of pigeonholed?
Well, first of all, don't read certain magazines like I did this morning on the 50 most beautiful people, because that will help you feel bad about yourself. Nobody Beautiful was over 50 in that magazine this morning. And then I think it's important that we become, that we have positive attitude about aging and that we're less fearful. Those are the two major things I would want to leave people with today.
And once again, what are people afraid of? Just the changes?
Yes, the changes, okay? But there are some wonderful changes too, Judy. And, so try and be excited about some of those.
Well, I was excited when the children moved out.
There you go, all right? And there's some other exciting news in this book too.
And tell me, is there another book that you're working on?
I'm working on another book, 2 or 3 other books, always at the same time. One is called An Evolving Woman, which takes us through the next part of the journey. One is a novel, and the other one is a guide for the boomer guide for the slightly depressed. And that's going to be a funny book. Yeah.
As a mother, what advice would you give your daughter as far as some of the things that you've sort of transitioned through in your life as words of wisdom?
I tell her to read my book. I wrote it for her and for all the other women in the world. But yeah, I would tell her the same things I'm telling you and people who are watching the show today. Be less fearful. Get the information you need to age well and have fun.
And how can people find your books?
They're on Amazon. The local bookstores are now carrying them because I've been speaking around. And yeah, they're out there.
Well, I want to thank you for coming and talking today. It's been a lot of fun.
I enjoyed it, Judy.
That's our program for today. I'm Judy Simpson. We'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.